Imagine streets where every day is a struggle. Streets soaked in desperation and hope. Here, power isn't given, it's taken by force. In the mid-20th century, two kings ruled America. One was quiet, invisible. His web entangled the entire city. That was the Mafia. The other was loud, furious, born from anger and pain. They were the Black Panthers. Everyone thinks their paths never crossed, but that's a lie. Watch until the end and you will uncover the secret war the FBI tried to erase from history, and the secret pact, forged in cigar smoke and gunpowder, that forever changed the rules of the street. To understand the full fury of this clash, you have to go down to the very bottom. Harlem, Oakland, Chicago in the 60s. These weren't just neighborhoods, they were cauldrons boiling with poverty, injustice, and police brutality. For young African Americans, every day was a test of survival. And in this darkness, the Italian Mafia felt right at home. They were the masters of the shadows. Their business was fear. They controlled everything: unions, illegal betting, drugs, and protection rackets. The Mafia operated quietly and methodically. Why fight when you can buy? Why shout when you can silence someone forever? The five families of New York, Gambino, Genovese, Colombo, Lucchese, and Bonanno, divided the city like a pie. Their soldiers, dressed in expensive suits, extorted money from small shopkeepers, got entire neighborhoods hooked on heroin, and eliminated rivals so cleanly that the police could only shrug. To them, the black neighborhoods were just a cash cow. But in 1966, in Oakland, California, a roar was heard across America. Two college students, Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, founded the Black Panther Party. These weren't ordinary gangsters, they were revolutionaries. Their uniform? Black leather jackets, black berets, and weapons in hand. But their main weapon was ideology. They quoted Mao Zedong and Che Guevara, demanding freedom and power for their people. The Panthers started free breakfast programs for children, launched free health clinics, and patrolled the streets, protecting residents from police brutality. They brought order, their own kind of order, and very soon, their order clashed with the order of the Mafia. Picture this scene. Young men in black berets walk into a small shop that has been paying tribute to the mob for years and tell the owner, "You don't pay anyone anymore. We protect you now." The first and main front of their war was drugs. For decades, the Mafia had poisoned black communities with heroin, making millions and keeping people subdued. The Panthers declared drugs public enemy number one. They stormed drug dens, beat up dealers, and burned the product right on the streets. They understood, as long as their brothers were on the needle, there could be no talk of freedom, and every burned bag of heroin was a blow to the Mafia's wallet. At first, the Mafia bosses just smirked. Some street-level upstarts, they'd be crushed in a week. But they miscalculated. The Panthers weren't just a gang, they were an idea. Thousands of people, tired of being afraid, stood behind them. If the mob beat up one of their activists, hundreds more would take to the streets the next day. They were organized, disciplined, and most importantly, they were not afraid to die for their beliefs. Legend has it that first blood was spilled in Harlem. A local boss from the Genovese family decided to teach the upstarts a lesson. His men ambushed a Panther patrol, but instead of scared kids, they met fierce resistance. A brutal fight broke out with brass knuckles, chains, and knives. The mafiosi, used to easy money, were shocked by the Panthers' ferocity and courage. They retreated, leaving their wounded on the asphalt. This incident was the spark. Conflicts began to erupt across the country. In Chicago, Panthers led by the charismatic Fred Hampton kicked Sam Giancana's men out of several neighborhoods. They literally recaptured territory where the mob had collected tribute for decades. They didn't just fight, they waged counter-propaganda, explaining to people that the protection money they paid the mob was used to buy the drugs that were killing their own children. The Mafia was in a tough spot.
Start an all-out war? That would attract too much attention from the FBI, which was already breathing down their necks. Besides, a war with the Panthers wasn't like a war with another family. The Panthers didn't have specific capos or consiglieres whose assassination would solve the problem. It was a popular movement. Kill one leader and 3 new ones, even angrier and more determined, would take his place. This was especially clear in the story of the legendary Harlem gangster, Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy wasn't a Panther. He was an old-school crime king, but he was a black king. For decades, he held the Italians at bay, preventing them from completely taking over Harlem. He did business with them, but always on his own terms. And when the Panthers began to gain power, it's rumored that Bumpy gave them his tacit support. He understood that these young lions were doing what he could only dream of, creating a real force capable of speaking to the Mafia as equals. Street legends tell of a meeting between Bumpy and a Genovese family boss. The Italian was complaining about the Panthers interfering with business, to which Bumpy, with a smirk, allegedly replied, "This is my street, and new flowers are growing on it. Either you learn not to step on them, or their thorns will pierce your fancy shoes."
But the real test of strength happened in New York. Joe Colombo, the boss of one of the 5 families, wasn't just a mobster, he was a showman. He created the Italian-American Civil Rights League to fight prejudice and the FBI. He led thousands in rallies, claiming that the Mafia didn't exist. And this man, a master of PR and intrigue, came face to face with the Black Panthers. The Panthers saw Colombo's league as nothing more than a smokescreen. They openly accused him of using the guise of civil rights to continue poisoning their neighborhoods with drugs. At one of the league's rallies, a group of Panthers staged a counter-protest. They stood with signs reading, "The Italian League is a front for the mob," and "Stop selling heroin to our children." The tension was palpable. Colombo's men were ready to tear the defiant activists apart, but the order was to stand down. Colombo knew that a bloodbath in front of reporters would be the end of his civil rights defender image. It was a public checkmate. The Panthers showed they weren't afraid to challenge the most powerful boss in the city, and they did it not in a dark alley, but in broad daylight. It was a slap in the face heard throughout the criminal underworld. And now we come to the climax, to the secret itself. Seeing that force wasn't working and public confrontation was only hurting them, the Mafia bosses decided to take an extreme measure. They decided to negotiate. It sounds unbelievable. The almighty commission, the council of all bosses, sitting down at the negotiating table with street revolutionaries? But the facts speak for themselves. In the early 70s, Mafia attacks on the Panthers virtually ceased. Through secret channels, via intermediaries, a tacit pact was made. The terms were simple. The Panthers would stay out of the Mafia's global affairs, unions, major construction projects, casinos. In return, the Mafia would drastically reduce the flow of heroin into Panther-controlled neighborhoods and stop extorting small businesses under their protection. It was an agreement born not of respect, but of necessity. The Mafia realized it was easier to cede a small piece of territory than to wage an endless, costly war that also attracted the feds. And the Panthers got what they fought for: the chance to clean up their streets from the deadliest plague and protect their people. They didn't defeat the Mafia, no, they forced the monster to reckon with them. They snatched their home from its jaws.
This fragile peace benefited both sides, but there was a third player in this story, the most dangerous and cunning one, the FBI and Director J. Edgar Hoover personally. To Hoover, the Panthers were the #1 threat to national security, and he used every tool to destroy them. planting informants, instigating conflicts with other gangs, and of course, exploiting their conflict with the Mafia. FBI agents would leak information to the Mafia about the movements of Panther leaders, hoping the mobsters would do their dirty work for them. At the same time, they would feed disinformation to the Panthers about the Mafia's plans to provoke a new wave of violence. The goal was simple: to have both sides destroy each other, leaving the FBI with clean hands. It was the dirtiest game of all. But both the Panthers and the Mafia, hardened by the bitter lessons of the streets, smelled a setup. They sensed that their war had a third, invisible director. And this, strangely enough, only strengthened their unspoken truce. They now had a common enemy who was more dangerous than both of them combined: the federal government. They realized that while they were fighting each other, the real predator was watching calmly from the sidelines. However, the end of this story was already written. The Panther Empire didn't fall at the hands of the Mafia. It was destroyed from within and without by the FBI's COINTELPRO program. Leaders were assassinated, like Fred Hampton, or thrown in prison on fabricated charges, like Huey Newton. The movement was drowned in provocations and internal strife. By the end of the 70s, only memories remained of the Panthers' former power. The Mafia, on the other hand, lasted longer, but its golden age was also coming to an end. The new RICO Act allowed the government to imprison entire families, from the boss down to the last soldier. The old dons who understood the street code were gone, replaced by a new generation, greedy, foolish, and addicted to drugs. They destroyed their own world from within. In the end, the two kings of the streets had fallen. So, what is left of this forgotten war? A legend remains. The legend of how a handful of desperate idealists, armed with a belief in justice, challenged the most powerful criminal organization in the world. They didn't wear expensive suits or smoke Cuban cigars. They wore black berets and shared their last piece of bread with the children of their neighborhood.
Their struggle is a reminder that true strength is born not from money, but from unity and an unbreakable will. They proved that even the most terrifying monster can retreat when faced with people who have nothing to lose but their chains. This is not a story about gangsters. It is a story about warriors. Warriors for the soul of their streets. This war remained a secret, hidden away in the dusty archives of the FBI. But now, you know the truth. Did you like this story? Want to find out how a single gangster intelligence officer created a drug cartel that was better organized than a Fortune 500 company? If this video gets 1,000 likes, we'll release a feature on Frank Lucas and his blue magic. Subscribe, hit the bell, and tell us in the comments which criminal legend you want to hear about next. Stay strong.